My ex-wife tried to turn our kids against me with lies. They're now adults and want nothing to do with her. The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when she started her campaign. I remember sitting in my empty apartment, boxes stacked against the walls, wondering how 18 years of marriage had crumbled so completely. What I didn't know was that the real battle was just beginning. The first signs were subtle. My daughter, barely 8 at the time, would come back from her mother's house asking strange questions. Why did Daddy make Mommy so sad? Why did Daddy yell at Mommy all the time? The questions hit me like physical blows because I knew where they were coming from, and I knew they weren't true. My son, 2 years younger, would barely look at me during our weekend visits, clinging to his sister like she was his lifeline. I tried explaining to them that sometimes grown-ups disagree, that both Mommy and Daddy love them very much, but it felt like trying to hold back the ocean with my bare hands. Their mother had a head start, and she was using every minute of it. The custody arrangement gave her primary custody during the week, which meant 5 days of her version of events versus my 2 days of trying to undo the damage. The lies started small but grew more elaborate over time. I supposedly forgot to pick them up from school events that I was never told about. I apparently said mean things about their mother that I never said. I was painted as the absent father who cared more about work than his family, when in reality I had been the one coaching Little League, helping with homework, and reading bedtime stories for years. What hurt most was watching my children's faces change when they looked at me. The easy affection we'd shared was replaced by wariness, suspicion, and eventually something that looked dangerously close to contempt. My daughter stopped hugging me goodbye. My son stopped calling me Daddy, switching to a formal dad that felt like a slap every time I heard it. The court-mandated family counselor seemed to buy into the narrative that I was the problem. Every session felt like an interrogation where I was guilty until proven innocent. My ex-wife would sit there with tears in her eyes, painting herself as the victim while I struggled to defend myself against accusations that felt like shadows. Impossible to grasp and impossible to fight. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every pickup and drop-off, every accusation. I filled notebook after notebook with dates, times, and exact words. My friends thought I was losing my mind, but I felt like I was fighting for my sanity. The gaslighting was so complete that I sometimes wondered if I really was the monster she painted me to be. The breaking point came when my son was 10. He looked me straight in the eye and told me he hated me, that I had ruined his mother's life, that he wished I would just disappear forever. The words came out of his mouth, but they were spoken in her voice, using phrases no 10-year-old would naturally use. I sat in my car afterward and cried until I couldn't breathe. I considered giving up then. The thought of walking away, of sparing my children the continued conflict, seemed almost merciful. But something deep inside me refused to let go. These were my kids, my flesh and blood, and I knew that somewhere underneath all the poison, they still needed their father. The years that followed were the hardest of my life. I maintained the visits even when they felt like torture. I attended every school event I was allowed to attend, even when my children pretended I wasn't there. I sent birthday cards and Christmas presents that went unacknowledged. I kept showing up, kept being present, kept loving them even when they couldn't love me back. My ex-wife got remarried when the kids were in middle school. Her new husband was everything she claimed I wasn't: successful, charming, generous with expensive gifts. The kids seemed to warm to him quickly, which felt like another knife in my chest. I watched from the sidelines as he walked my daughter down the aisle at her 8th grade graduation, stood where I should have been standing. High school brought new challenges. My daughter started acting out, getting into trouble at school, staying out past curfew. My son became withdrawn, spending hours alone in his room. I could see they were struggling, but every attempt I made to help was met with resistance. Their mother had convinced them that I was the source of all their problems, that their lives would be perfect if I just wasn't in the picture. The first crack in her facade came when my daughter was 16. She had gotten into trouble at school for drinking, and during the meeting with the principal, her mother flew into a rage that seemed disproportionate to the situation. She started screaming about how everyone was against her, how her daughter was just like me, how she couldn't handle the stress anymore. My daughter sat there looking shocked, like she was seeing her mother clearly for the first time. I didn't say anything. I just sat there quietly, letting her words speak for themselves. After the meeting, my daughter walked out with me instead of her mother. We didn't talk about what had happened, but something had shifted. She started texting me occasionally, short messages that felt like olive branches. My son's awakening came later, during his senior year of high school. He had been planning to go to college across the country, as far from both of us as possible. But when he didn't get into his first choice school, his mother's reaction was brutal. She told him he was a disappointment, that he had wasted all the money she'd spent on his education, that he was turning out just like his worthless father. He called me that night, crying for the first time since he was a little boy. He didn't apologize for all the years of coldness, didn't acknowledge what had happened between us. He just asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes so fast I probably gave him whiplash. College was a turning point for both of them. Away from their mother's daily influence, they started to see things differently. My daughter called me one day during her sophomore year, her voice shaking with rage and hurt. She had been going through some old papers and found letters I had written to her over the years. Letters her mother had intercepted and hidden. Birthday wishes, expressions of love, explanations of why I couldn't be there for certain events. All the things I had tried to communicate that never reached her. The conversation that followed was one of the most painful of my life. She asked me directly if the things her mother had said about me were true. I told her the truth, all of it, holding nothing back. I didn't try to vilify her mother or make excuses for the years of separation. I just told her what had really happened, what I had really said and done, and let her draw her own conclusions. My son's realization came more gradually. He started asking questions about his childhood, about specific incidents that didn't quite add up in his memory. He began to notice how his mother's stories changed depending on who she was talking to, how she manipulated situations to cast herself as the victim. The final straw came when he overheard her talking to a friend about how she had protected him and his sister from their toxic father by keeping us apart. The confrontation between my children and their mother was explosive. They demanded answers, explanations, apologies. Instead, she doubled down on her lies, accused them of being brainwashed by me, threatened to cut them off financially if they maintained contact with me. It was the last mistake she would make in her campaign to turn them against me. Both of my children cut contact with her completely. They moved out of her house, refused her calls, returned her gifts unopened. The woman who had spent years telling them I was the destructive force in their lives had destroyed her relationship with them through her own actions. The reconciliation with my children wasn't instant or easy. There were years of hurt and mistrust to work through. We all said things we regretted, cried tears we had held back for too long, and slowly, carefully began to rebuild what had been broken. They apologized for believing the lies, for shutting me out, for the years of coldness and cruelty. I told them they had nothing to apologize for. They had been children, manipulated and used as weapons in an adult war they never should have been part of. My daughter is married now with 2 children of her own. She named her son after me, a gesture that still brings tears to my eyes. She's a fierce mother, protective of her children in ways that speak to her own childhood trauma. She's also incredibly careful about the people she lets into her life, having learned early that those who claim to love you can sometimes hurt you the most. My son followed in my footsteps professionally, though he jokes that he's determined to be better at the job than I ever was. He's methodical, careful, thinks everything through twice before acting. He says he learned from watching the consequences of impulsive decisions, though I suspect he's talking about his mother's choices rather than mine. We talk regularly now, text throughout the week, get together for holidays and birthdays. They've both told me they love me, words I thought I might never hear again. The relationships we have now are different from what they would have been if we'd never been separated. There's a deeper appreciation for each other, a knowledge of how precious and fragile family bonds can be. Their mother reaches out occasionally, usually during holidays or significant events. She sends cards that go unanswered, leaves voicemails that get deleted. She's tried reaching out through extended family members, mutual friends, even showing up at my daughter's workplace once. Each attempt is met with the same response: silence. She burned those bridges so thoroughly that there's nothing left to rebuild on. Sometimes I wonder if she realizes what she lost. Does she understand that in her effort to take my children away from me, she ended up losing them entirely? Does she regret the years of lies, the poison she poured into their ears, the way she used them as weapons in a war they never signed up for? I don't know, and honestly, I don't care anymore. The hardest part isn't the lost years, though those still hurt when I think about them. It's not even the pain of watching my children struggle with trust issues and relationship problems that stem from their childhood trauma. The hardest part is knowing that it didn't have to happen at all. We could have been civilized about the divorce, put the children first, worked together to minimize the damage. Instead, she chose warfare and everyone paid the price. I've learned a lot about resilience in the years since the divorce. I've learned that love isn't always enough, that persistence doesn't always pay off, that sometimes the only thing you can do is keep showing up and hope that eventually, truth will win out. I've learned that children are more resilient than we give them credit for, but also more vulnerable to the adults who are supposed to protect them. Most importantly, I've learned that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds. My children and I have found our way back to each other, scarred but stronger. We've built something new from the ashes of what was destroyed, something that maybe couldn't have existed without the struggle. The bond we share now is tested by fire, proven by time, and stronger than any lie could ever break. The woman who tried to turn my children against me sits alone now, surrounded by the wreckage of her own choices. She got what she wanted. She succeeded in separating us for years, in causing immense pain and suffering. But in the end, her victory was hollow, temporary, and ultimately self-destructive. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. My children are adults now, with their own lives, their own families, their own understanding of what happened during those dark years. They've chosen to have me in their lives, to trust me with their hearts again, to give me the greatest gift possible, forgiveness and love. Their mother's campaign of lies ultimately failed, not because I fought back, but because truth has a power that deception can never match. The pain of those lost years will never fully fade, but it's been transformed into something else. A deep appreciation for the relationships we have now, an understanding of how precious family really is, and a commitment to never take love for granted again. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from simply refusing to give up, continuing to love even when that love isn't returned, and trusting that eventually, truth will find a way to shine through the darkness.